Imagine finding out that the grand chess master of the universe does not just anticipate the bad guy's moves.
Right.
He actually, sets up the board so the bad guy is guaranteed to fall for a lie.
Yeah, it is quite a thought.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am so glad you are joining us today. We are looking at one of the most terrifying, untalked about concepts in ancient theology.
We really are.
The idea that God actively weaponizes mass deception.
It is a lot to take in.
So for you listening right now, consider this a theological warning label.
For sure.
This deep dive is going to shatter that clean, comfortable, sanitized view of God that so many of us grew up with.
Yeah, the one that fits nicely in a box.
Right. We are taking a hard look at texts, arguing that God is an active orchestrator of history, and that includes sovereignty over sinful actions and mass delusion.
Orchestrating them as a precise, calculated judgment against human rebellion.
It is, it's the absolute definition of theological muddy waters for the modern mind.
It is. We like things to be visible, to be categorized neatly.
We really do.
We want a universe where God is entirely separated from anything messy, where he only ever does the visibly, obviously positive thing.
Like he's just up there smiling and nodding.
Right. But our roadmap for this discussion is going to take us across multiple centuries and biblical genres to challenge that assumption.
So where are we starting?
We will examine historical events from the Old Testament, focusing on King Ahab, the prophet Amos, and Ezekiel.
Okay, heavy hitters.
Then we will move into the New Testament to examine the Apostle Paul's urgent warnings to the early church.
Yeah.
Look at the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ himself, and finish with how the Westminster Confession of Faith synthesizes all of this teaching on providence.
I have to admit, my initial reaction to reading these historical and theological documents was, it was genuine shock.
I am not surprised at all.
The modern church often portrays God as this cosmic bystander.
Yes.
It is like he is up in heaven wringing his hands, desperately hoping that people use their free will to choose the good.
That is the popular narrative.
But the scholars and theologians we are reading today, they paint a picture of a sovereign Lord who actively hands rebels over to delusion.
It is a terrifying majesty.
It feels very unsettling because it goes against the grain of the cultural water we swim in.
What is fascinating here is that this is the real meat of the theological discipline.
Yeah.
It challenges belief systems that have become very popular today.
Like what kind of systems?
For those who might be rusty on their theological terms, we are talking about systems like Arminianism or open theism.
Okay, right.
Those are the belief systems that heavily focus on human free will.
Got it.
And they suggest God does not control, or perhaps in the case of open theism, even know every future human choice.
Which is a huge claim.
It is. The scholars point out that those systems attempt to strip God of his sovereign prerogative to blind and harden.
So we kind of have to drop our modern baggage here.
If we want to understand the ancient texts, we have to lay aside our modern democratic sensibilities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We need to look at the actual grammar, the syntax, and the ancient history of the text itself.
Let's start with a really striking question raised by the theologians.
Okay.
What happens when a group of people repeatedly despise the truth?
That is the core issue.
According to the historical records we are examining, God's first strike of judgment is not, fire raining down from the sky.
No, it is not.
It is a famine.
To understand that famine, we need to look at the geopolitical and historical reality of the prophet Amos.
Okay, set the scene for us.
We are situating ourselves in the 8th century BC.
Yeah.
The northern kingdom of Israel is experiencing massive economic prosperity and territorial expansion under the reign of King Jeroboam II.
So things are going really well for them on paper.
On paper, yes. There was a power vacuum in the ancient Near East at the time.
Meaning the big bullies were out of the picture for a minute?
Precisely. The Assyrian Empire, which normally terrorized everyone, was temporarily weak. This allowed Israel to expand its borders, control major trade routes, and accumulate massive wealth.
It was a massive boom time. The texts describe ivory beds, summer houses, winter houses, and vineyards.
Total luxury.
But underneath that shiny economic surface, social injustice is rampant.
Very rampant.
The new merchant class is oppressing the poor, selling the needy for a pair of sandals, as the text says.
It was brutal.
And alongside this economic boom, religious syncretism is thriving at places like Bethel and Gilgal.
Religious syncretism is a crucial concept here.
What does that actually look like on the ground?
It means they were blending the worship of Yahweh with the worship of local Canaanite deities like Baal.
So hedging their bets, basically.
Yeah. They kept the festivals, they kept the outward rituals of worshiping the God of Israel, but they infused it with pagan practices.
Wow.
The people felt entirely secure because their religious rituals were continuing right alongside their surging wealth.
So they thought they were blessed.
They assumed economic prosperity was the undeniable proof of God's favor.
And into that false security, God promises a specific judgment.
Yes, he does.
In Amos chapter 8, verse 11, he says he will send a famine, not of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord.
The deprivation of the truth is the judgment.
That's so intense.
God punishes those who do not want his word with the privation of his word.
It makes sense, though.
It is a fascinating psychological and spiritual mechanism.
Right.
When a culture decides that they prefer a synthetic, compromised religion that validates their greed, God does not try to shout louder over their noise.
He did not force it.
He simply stops speaking.
Think of a parent dealing with a child who constantly complains about the healthy, nutritious meals being cooked.
It is a great analogy.
The child throws a tantrum, demands candy, demands ice cream day after day.
We have all seen that.
Eventually, the parent just stops cooking the healthy food.
Yeah.
The parent steps back and lets the child gorge on the junk food they demand until they get a massive stomachache.
They let the natural consequences take over.
The absence of the good thing is the discipline. God just stops speaking the rigorous truth they despise.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. The prophet Zechariah brings in another layer to this judgment.
What does he add?
In Zechariah chapter 11, verses 16 and 17, God talks about raising up worthless shepherds over the people.
Shepherds who do not heal or nourish the flock.
Right. When a people treat the rigorous truth of God with contempt, God does not just leave a vacuum.
He fills it.
He actively gives them the false, corrupt leaders they actually want.
The ones they were asking for all along.
Leaders who will not care for the destroyed, seek the young, or heal the maimed.
That is chilling.
The worthless shepherd is a divine scourge against a rebellious flock. The mechanism of judgment is giving the people over to their own flawed desires.
The authors we are reading made a fascinating and likely controversial modern parallel here.
Yes, they do pull this into the present day.
And I want to be very clear for you listening right now. We are just neutrally reporting what the authors of these texts are arguing here.
We are just looking at their theological critique.
Right. We are not taking a political side on this show, left or right. We are just giving you the information from the source material.
Absolutely.
So the authors argue that if you look at modern secular frameworks, like critical race theory, intersectionality, the broader social justice movement, these are not just political trends.
They see a spiritual dimension to it.
They view them as actual theological judgments, delusions given to a culture that rejected traditional gospel truths.
It is a bold claim.
When a culture, or even a church, prioritizes entertainment, pragmatism, and a sort of therapeutic moralism over rigorous scripture exposition, the argument is that God hands them over to these secular theories as a form of active judgment.
It raises a significant question about causality.
How so?
The text asserts that the loss of divine revelation, the famine of the word, is the severest consequence of chronic covenantal rebellion.
Worse than an actual famine.
It surpasses any physical famine or military destruction. The judgment is that the culture gets the exact ear-tickling philosophers and leaders it craves.
But there is a leap here that I am struggling with.
What is that?
It is one thing for God to just walk away and let us stumble in the dark. That is the famine concept.
Sure.
But the text does not stop at the dark, does it? It suggests God actually sends the trap.
That is the uncomfortable part.
We move from the famine of the word to the actual blinding of human faculties.
This brings us to Isaiah's terrifying commission in Isaiah chapter 6.
This part always stops me in my tracks.
It is very stark.
The context here is the death of King Uzziah, who had reigned for decades. It is a time of national instability.
A lot of anxiety in the air.
Isaiah goes into the temple. He sees the Lord enthroned. He is terrified. He is cleansed by the burning coal. And he says, "Here am I. Send me."
The classic call narrative.
You would think God is going to say, "Great. Go make my message crystal clear so everyone repents."
That is what we expect.
But Isaiah is not told to go and make things clear. God commands him, "Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy and blind their eyes."
The command finishes with, "Lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed."
Hold on. You are saying God intentionally told Isaiah to make the message confusing.
That is what the text says.
I am sorry, but that completely short-circuits everything I was taught in Sunday school.
It throws a wrench in the typical narrative.
How is that not just cosmic cruelty? Why would he command a prophet to actively make people blind, specifically to prevent them from turning and being healed?
It feels jarring, but we have to look at the exegetical reality of what scholars call the covenant lawsuit setting.
The covenant lawsuit, okay.
God does not harden morally neutral people.
Right.
There is no such thing as an innocent person begging for truth while God capriciously blindfolds them.
That is a key distinction.
God is dealing with a persistently rebellious nation. Israel has had the law, the prophets, the visible signs of the covenant for centuries, and they have repeatedly chosen idolatry.
So God is essentially taking Israel to court after centuries of patience.
Precisely. The delayed repentance has shifted into judicial blindness.
Okay.
God is decreeing that the very preaching of the word will now have a hardening effect rather than a softening effect.
Wow. The preaching itself does the hardening.
The word will expose and confirm their rebellion. Think about how the sun affects different materials.
Okay, I am tracking.
The exact same sun that melts wax will harden clay.
Oh, that is a great image.
The nature of the material determines the reaction. The preaching of the prophet is the sun, and the persistently rebellious hearts of the people are the clay.
So the light just bakes them solid.
The presentation of the truth hardens them further.
And the theology points out that this is not just an Old Testament phenomenon.
No, it continues.
This exact concept is brought right into the New Testament, directly into the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ.
In Matthew chapter 13 and Luke chapter 8, the disciples come to Jesus and ask him directly why he speaks to the crowds in parables.
As a modern reader, I always assumed parables were just these folksy, accessible teaching illustrations.
Like an ancient PowerPoint presentation.
Right, like Jesus was just being a good communicator, using agricultural metaphors so the first century farmers would understand the concepts better.
That is the common assumption. We view parables as sermon illustrations designed to make things easier to grasp.
But that is not it at all, is it?
Jesus gives a devastating answer that contradicts that completely. He quotes that exact passage from Isaiah 6.
Oh, he brings Isaiah right into it.
He says, he speaks in parables specifically so that seeing they may not see and hearing they may not understand.
He intentionally concealed the truth from them.
He did. Parables are not teaching illustrations. They are mechanisms of divine sorting.
Divine sorting.
Christ is acting as the ultimate prophet who reveals the kingdom to little children, the dependent, the humble, and actively hides it from the proud, the wise, and the understanding.
If we unpack the psychology of that for you listening right now, the concept here is gifted understanding.
Yes, that is the theological term.
The scholars argue that if a person understands the truth of the gospel, it is a divine donation.
It is handed to them.
It is not the result of superior human intellect. It is not about having a higher IQ or being more spiritually sensitive than your neighbor.
Jesus says, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." That is Matthew 13:11.
So it is a direct gift.
Understanding is a gift of sovereign grace, not a human achievement.
Yeah.
If you see the truth, it is because God opened your eyes, not because you squinted hard enough.
That is incredibly humbling.
The natural human mind is actively hostile to the things of God, according to the theological framework we are examining.
We have seen God withhold truth, and we have seen him dull the human senses through parables and prophetic preaching.
Right.
Now we need to look at what might be the most staggering claim in this entire stack of historical records.
It gets even heavier.
God actively dispatching deception.
To grasp this, we turn to the Ahab narrative in 1 Kings chapter 22.
Tell us about Ahab.
The historical setting is the mid-9th century BC. King Ahab of the northern kingdom of Israel is a notorious monarch.
The guy was just awful.
He is married to Jezebel, he has institutionalized Baal worship, and he frequently murders the true prophets of Yahweh.
Not exactly a stellar resume.
He is aligned with King Jehoshaphat of Judah, the southern kingdom, and they are seeking to reclaim a highly strategic military territory called Ramoth-Gilead from the nation of Aram, or modern-day Syria.
Ramoth-Gilead was a major city on the King's Highway, so whoever controlled it controlled a massive amount of trade and wealth.
It was a very lucrative spot.
Ahab, being the corrupt king he is, has gathered 400 sycophant prophets around him.
Yes.
They are state-sponsored yes-men. They are culturally conditioned to prophesy prosperity, telling Ahab precisely what he wants to hear.
They say, "Go up, for the Lord will give it into the hand of the king."
Jehoshaphat, who is a much more faithful king, is uneasy.
He can tell something is off.
He senses that these 400 prophets are just echoing Ahab's own ambitions back to him. He asks for a true prophet of Yahweh.
Enter Micaiah.
Micaiah is the lone dissenting voice.
He is.
He does not just disagree with the 400 prophets. He pulls back the curtain on the spiritual realm. He describes a vision of the divine council in heaven.
This vision is wild. God is sitting on his throne, asking the heavenly host, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead?
A spirit volunteers.
Yeah.
The spirit says, I will entice him, I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets.
In the original Hebrew, that is ruach sheker, a spirit of falsehood and vanity.
God's response is the kicker. He says, you are to entice him and you shall succeed. Go out and do so.
God guarantees the success of the deception. He authorizes the mission.
He signs off on it completely.
This is a targeted, covenantal judgment against a king who had consistently hated the truth. Ahab loved lies.
He had been asking for lies his whole life.
He surrounded himself with false prophets for years. So God uses a lying spirit to give Ahab the exact lie he needs to hear in order to march into his prophesied doom at Ramoth-Gilead.
We see this same intense linguistic structure in Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 9.
Yes, very similar dynamic.
The scene there involves elders coming to consult God, but they are secretly harboring idols in their hearts.
They are completely two-faced.
They want a word from the Lord, but they refuse to give up their hidden sins.
The Hebrew syntax in Ezekiel 14 is incredibly precise and unavoidable. The text uses the Hebrew root patah.
Patah, okay.
When applied to the human prophet in the nifal stem, which is the passive state, it means to be gullible or easily enticed.
No, passive state, like it just happens to them.
Right. It reads, and if the prophet is deceived.
That sounds somewhat passive, like the prophet just made a mistake or got confused. But then God speaks about his own action.
Yes. God speaks in the peel stem, specifically the peel perfect, pitute.
The peel stem, what does that do to the meaning?
The peel stem in Hebrew grammar indicates intensive active causation. It is not passive permission.
Oh, wow.
God says, I, Yahweh, have deceived that prophet.
I, Yahweh, have deceived that prophet. I mean, the unyielding nature of that original Hebrew grammar is incredibly heavy.
You cannot ignore it.
You cannot soften that into a passive, hands-off approach.
You cannot. This is not bare permission. God actively weaponizes the deception.
He is using it as a tool.
He uses the deceived prophet to give the idolatrous elders the false comfort their depraved hearts desire, accomplishing his prophesied justice against them.
A listener might think, okay, that is the Old Testament. That is ancient Israel, chaotic kings, and ancient prophets. Surely this active deception does not happen in the church age.
You would think so.
But we turn to the Apostle Paul's letters to see this happening in the New Testament era.
We must look at Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians.
Let's set the scene for you. Imagine a young, persecuted church in the first century.
It was a very hostile environment.
Thessalonica is a prominent, bustling Greco-Roman port city right on the Via Egnatia, the major Roman highway spanning across Macedonia.
Lots of traffic, lots of trade.
The believers there are surrounded by the Roman imperial cult, where Caesar is worshipped as a god. They are dealing with intense local persecution.
And internal confusion.
Right. On top of that, they are receiving forged letters claiming that the day of the Lord, the end of the world, has already happened and they missed it. They are terrified.
Paul writes to Thessalonians chapter 2 to comfort them by giving them a clear prophetic timeline.
He needs to settle her down.
He talks about the coming of the man of lawlessness. In verses 9 and 10, Paul acknowledges the satanic means of deception.
Okay.
He says this lawless one operates according to the working of Satan, with false signs and wonders, and wicked deception aimed at those who are perishing.
Paul makes a terrifying pivot. In verse 11, there is this Greek conjunction, diatuto, which translates to for this reason or therefore.
It connects the two ideas.
Because of the previous things, a divine action happens. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion.
The Greek exegesis here is vital.
Bank that down for us.
The phrase strong delusion translates the Greek energean planies. Energean means an active, effectual working or operation.
So it is doing something. It is moving.
It is dynamic, not static. And planes, which is where we get the word planet, meaning a wandering body, means error or a wandering from the path of truth.
Wow. Okay.
So God is sending an active, effectual working of wandering.
It is not just that they get confused. The text has a purpose clause.
Eis tu Pistiose autos tusude.
And what does that mean?
The Greek preposition denotes explicit purpose. God's design is so that they may believe what is false, or more literally translated, so that they place saving faith in Eli.
In the lie.
Pseudos, intentional falsehood.
If God is the one sending the delusion, sending the effectual wandering so that they believe the lie, how are the people guilty?
That is the obvious question, isn't it?
How can God judge them for a delusion he sent?
That is the necessary question, and Paul answers it in the preceding clause, in verse 10.
What does he say?
The delusion comes upon those who are perishing because they refuse to love the truth.
The human rebellion precedes the divine blinding.
Precisely. We need to unpack the psychology of this. They did not just fail to understand the truth intellectually, they actively refused to love it.
It was a moral rejection, not a math problem they couldn't solve.
The text says they had pleasure in unrighteousness. When a human being loves unrighteousness, their brain, their soul, their entire worldview adapts to protect that love.
They build a fortress around their sin.
God is not corrupting an innocent person. He is giving the rebel over to the full trajectory of their own depravity.
Just letting them have what they want.
He responds to their hatred of the truth by sealing them in the lie they already prefer.
We must address the massive theological issue we have been circling around.
The elephant in the room.
How do we reconcile this?
Yeah.
We've seen the text saying God sends lying spirits and strong delusions, but we also have the absolute biblical mandate that God cannot lie.
The absolute veracity of God is non-negotiable in this framework.
I mean, Titus chapter 1, verse 2 explicitly says God never lies. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 18 says it is impossible for God to lie.
Right.
How can the God of truth ordain deception without violating his own nature?
This is where historical confessional frameworks bring immense clarity.
Like the Westminster Confession.
The Westminster Confession of Faith offers a brilliant synthesis of these seemingly opposing ideas.
What does it say?
It states that God's almighty providence extends even to the first fall and all other sins of angels and men.
Okay.
However, it extends in such a way that the sinfulness proceeds entirely from the creature and not from God.
Meaning God is not a deceiver in the sinful human sense.
Correct. When a human lies, it is prompted by malice, fear, a lack of knowledge, or a desire to unjustly manipulate someone for personal gain.
It comes from a deficiency.
God is prompted by none of those things. His providence over deception is an act of perfect, infinite justice against rebellion.
Think of it like this. Imagine a flawless grandmaster playing chess against a highly malicious, aggressive, amateur opponent.
Okay, I like this analogy.
The grandmaster never breaks the rules. He never cheats. He plays a perfect, clean game.
He is playing flawlessly.
But because he is a grandmaster, he perfectly anticipates the opponent's flawed, aggressive, sinful moves.
He knows what they are going to do before they do it.
He arranges the board in such a way that the opponent's own blind aggression leads directly into a trap.
The opponent defeats himself.
The grandmaster orchestrates the checkmate using the opponent's bad moves. The opponent defeats himself through his own flaws, while the grandmaster remains a perfect player the entire time.
That is a highly effective way to conceptualize the relationship between primary and secondary agents.
Primary and secondary agents. Let's break that down.
God is the primary cause, the grandmaster. The lying spirit, the corrupt prophets of Ahab, the depraved human heart, these are secondary agents.
They are making their own choices.
They act entirely according to their own sinful natures. They lie because they love lying.
Right.
God flawlessly uses their wicked deception to execute his holy justice without ever violating his own holy nature.
Where does all of this terrifying, massive sovereignty point? This is not just an academic theory for a seminary classroom.
No, it has an actual destination.
It points directly to the central event of human history.
It points directly to the cross of Calvary. The crucifixion is the climax of sovereign providence over human deception.
When you look at the crucifixion of Jesus, you see a sheer, overwhelming amount of human deception.
It is everywhere in the narrative.
You have Judas Iscariot hiding his treachery for 3 years while walking alongside the Son of God.
A completely fabricated loyalty.
You have the illegal nighttime trials before the Sanhedrin, which were built entirely on the testimony of false witnesses.
The Greek word used there is pseudo-martyrs, liars.
You have Pontius Pilate, a Roman governor, declaring Jesus innocent with his own mouth, finding no fault in him, and then immediately handing him over to be executed anyway to appease a mob.
It is a masterclass of orchestrated, sovereignly ordained falsehood.
Just lie after lie after lie.
The early church understood this flawlessly. In Acts chapter 4, verses 27 and 28, the believers pray and declare that Herod, Pilate, the Gentiles, and the people of Israel did whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place.
The multiplying lies of the religious authorities and the political leaders were the precise, predestined instruments God used to bring the Son of God to the cross.
Which presents the ultimate paradox of the Christian faith.
It is incredible to think about.
God used the greatest deception and injustice of men to accomplish the greatest revelation of his truth.
The cross demonstrates that even in the darkest, most deceptive hour of human history, God's providence was unyielding and flawless.
Christ bore the wrath of the God of truth so that liars could be justified.
He took the curse of our deception, our dullness of heart, upon himself.
He turned the ultimate lie into the supreme act of saving grace.
Speaking directly to you, the listener, as we wrap up this deep dive.
Yes, let's bring it home.
If you understand the gospel today, if you see the truth of who Christ is, it is not because you are smarter, more educated, or more righteous than someone who is currently caught in a mass delusion.
It is not about your IQ.
It is because of sovereign mercy. The Father gave you eyes to see that reality should absolutely crush human pride and foster an intense gratitude.
It should also cause us to test our shepherds.
We have to be discerning.
The pastors, the leaders, the authors we listen to on a regular basis, do they preach the rigorous, sometimes uncomfortable word of God?
Or are they just giving us junk food?
Do they flatter human ability and avoid the hard doctrines we discussed today? We must demand fidelity to Scripture, not just charm, polish, or cultural popularity.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We have talked about God giving people over to the lies they desire as a form of judgment.
It is a heavy thought.
Think about the media you consume. Think about the voices you allow to influence you daily on your phone, your feeds, your networks.
Our digital diets.
If God's most severe judgment is to give us over to the flattering lies we secretly desire, what happens when we intentionally curate our own news feeds, our own algorithms, and our relationships to only tell us what we want to hear?
We are building our own echo chambers.
Are we building our own strong delusion before God even hands us over to one?
A sobering question for an age of customized reality.
It brings us right back to the beginning. We want a clean, sanitized view of the universe, but we are dealing with a sovereign God who judges the hidden, murky desires of the heart.
The Grandmaster is on the throne,
orchestrating history with perfect justice. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Reformed thinking. Keep seeking the truth.